Well, most people know that mistletoe is a great way to get to Christmas. Few realize that it's actually a parasite. There are about 90 species of mistletoe in Australia alone, and they all send out roots that penetrate the bark of trees and siphon off water and nutrients. The question is, how did they get out to these aerial gardens in the first place? The mistletoe bird. It specializes in popping open the parasite's ripe berries and swallowing the sticky contents. Thanks to the bird's modified digestive system, it only takes half an hour for the mistletoe seed to pass undamaged from beak to bottom. And that's when the bird starts gardening. Simply by wiping its bottom, the mistletoe bird manages to plant the sticky Klingon in the perfect position to form a new aerial garden. The mistletoe's developing root quickly penetrates the branch of its host and starts siphoning off all the nutrients it needs.
Yep, thank you. Thanks. I just like to show that, and also sometimes I've had troubles where the video would play halfway through my presentation, so I'll get it out of the way. So yeah, that explains it way better than I could just by actually seeing that beautiful footage of our mistletoe bird. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about a project that I've been working on, well, two projects actually. One's more local and another one is from where my home is currently. Grew up in Tamworth, but I live down in the Hunter Valley near Newcastle. So yeah, two projects that we've been working on to plant native mistletoe as a way to boost woodland bird diversity and help them actually adapt to our changing climate. So yeah, it's a story about a critically endangered bird, the Regent Honeyeater there on your left, and also the little native mistletoe bird, which you might be a bit more familiar with. They're a common species right across the country. Not so much anymore, unfortunately, with our Regent Honeyeater. So just very quickly, there might still be people that think that mistletoe are introduced pests. I still do come across people that believe that that's the case. That's the European mistletoe, the one we associate with Christmas. But actually mistletoe grows worldwide across different continents and habitats, all continents except for Antarctica. And it actually grows in all the states and territories of Australia except for Tasmania. But apparently it was in the fossil record before Gondwanaland split up and yeah, Tassie went off on its own. So it did used to be there as well. So there's actually 1,500 species, over 1,500 species across the world of mistletoe, and about 97 of them are native Australian species. So we don't have any introduced mistletoe in Australia, all native, as Dave Watson, the guru, would say. It's just as native as wattles and kangaroos. So a lot of people don't know that. We've got two family groups that occur in the Northwest and Northern Tablelands, but two main family groups across the whole country, which is these two here. And the Loranthaceae is the main one, 80 Australian species, and that's a lot that you'll be familiar with that have the fleshy leaves, form big clumps and get really pretty showy flowers, and they're the ones that our birds tend to like. So no, we can dispel that myth. They're not introduced pests. Obviously, another very common misconception is that mistletoes kill trees. It definitely can be a symptom that does add to a tree's load and its ability to be able to survive long term, but there are reasons for that, and I'll explain that. So in general, it's not in a mistletoe's interest to actually kill its host. It's a hemiparasitic shrub growing on a plant growing on another plant. It needs that host tree alive for its survival. It's got to get its water and its nutrients from that plant, so it'd be a pretty silly life strategy to kill off your host. Hosts have developed over, thousands of years ways to defend themselves from mistletoe. That could either be dropping an infested branch. I'll tell you about a project that I've been involved in where shedding bark with spotted gum is a very common way when a mistletoe bird might spread mistletoe seeds throughout the tree branches. It comes along to the time of shedding each year, and a lot of those mistletoe seeds will just get shed before they've had time to actually turn into a mistletoe. So our host trees are quite clever as well in making sure that mistletoe doesn't get out of check. And obviously, like a tree like this, it's got other issues as well, not just all those mistletoes. So a mistletoe bird's come along and had a field day there. It's gone absolutely delicious. You know, there's my sugary shot that I can set up in, and it's pooped its way all through that tree. But that tree's on its own, and that's a big issue. Isolated trees in paddocks often have really high mistletoe loads, or trees along roadsides, and that could be from a whole range of things. There could be fertiliser drift, too much fertiliser application in paddocks that have changed the soil biology. You get stock camping under trees, and different fire regimes, too frequent fire, infrequent fire. There's lots of different reasons there that a tree could become ill. And, you know, I'll use Dave Watson's analogies a bit because he does fantastic talks about mistletoe. And he would say it's a bit like a dog having fleas. The fleas aren't going to kill the dog. There's a lot of things that you know, it has to be a pretty sick dog basically for it to kill. And it's a bit like mistletoe. It has to be a pretty sick tree for the mistletoe to be the thing that it actually kills it off. And then myth number 3, mistletoe should be removed from trees. And that's really common still. Like in lots of talks that I do, I talk to people who will say, oh, I still cut it out, or my dad used to shoot it out of the trees and things like that, which is, you know, quite common. And I would definitely say, I'm not saying do not remove any mistletoe from your trees, or, you know, don't try to care for your trees, but I'd just say think about the biodiversity benefits that mistletoes have, and maybe seek some advice about maybe doing some management of it if it's an issue, rather than losing it all together, because there's lots of reasons why you should keep mistletoe in your gardens or on your properties. So yeah, the host will normally remain in a healthy condition, even though it's got some mistletoe attached to it, especially mistletoe that's in healthy remnant areas. Have a look next time you're walking in a national park or a nice healthy patch of bushland. You'll actually won't see mistletoe in very heavy infestations. It tends to be there'll be clumped areas where a mistletoe bird's visited, and then you might go for a couple of kilometres and barely see any at all, and that's kind of how it should be. And as I said, you're going to see it more when you're driving along roadsides, you're in open paddocks where paddock trees unfortunately don't have native predators, so we don't have possums anymore, we don't have a lot of bats visiting, like flying foxes, that type of thing. You don't have gliders and other insects that will actually predate on the leaves of the mistletoe and kill the mistletoe plants off. So that's a reason why you can look to do, which I know Landcare is heavily involved in, is sort of linking up areas of habitat, or perhaps stands of habitat around paddock trees, to kind of encourage those natural predators to keep your mistletoe in kind of good numbers. So I like to use a Robin Hood analogy with mistletoe. So a plant that robs from the rich, you've got these healthy host trees that it can grow on. It's going to get its nutrients from them in its water once it taps into the xylem, but it has to actually photosynthesize. So that's why it's got green fleshy leaves. And a lot of you will have seen when you're out and about that they get that woody horstorium, it's called, or a horstory ball. So that's where the mistletoe seed was, where it was deposited, and then that's where it puts its taproot down. And then the branch that was growing beyond that actually falls off, and so then you just get the mistletoe plant like that one up there growing out, and then they'll produce fruit and flowers after, well, we found in our plantings about 3 years from when you plant to when you probably get a mature plant that produces fruit and flowers. And the great thing about mistletoe is because they're getting water from the host, they can fruit and flower even in drought times and just drier times. So when our eucalypts don't produce blossom, you'll often find that there'll be mistletoe that's producing blossom. So it's just a really amazing resource throughout the whole landscape. You know, it grows right across the country. So when birds and animals are doing it tough, there'll usually be somewhere that a mistletoe is producing a food source for them. Yeah. Now, that's just the horstory ball. Okay, so then it robs from the rich, but it gives to the poor, or our, you know, our woodland birds and animals that are out there trying to make a living, kind of to do their best to stay alive out in the landscape, and especially in the drought times. So it provides food, shelter, nutrient-rich leaf litter. So that's been a really fascinating thing that university researchers have found out by looking at the trace elements and minerals that are in the leaves of mistletoe. And they're like a dripping tap of litter. They're just always dropping leaves. trees and more regularly than our gum trees. So that litter actually puts the nutrients back into the ground. So it's constantly putting the nutrients that it's getting from the tree. So it is taking from the tree, but it's actually giving back to the soil. So that's something that we're just starting to understand, is that food web relationship with mistletoe and the soil and the surrounding environment, and creates little clumps. So I don't know whether maybe you go bird watching and you'll not see or hear a bird for half an hour and you think, oh, this place is just dead, there's nothing here. And then you'll come along a little patch and there's just so much bird activity and all the birds are in that one spot. And you're sort of looking around trying to think, what could it be that why all the birds like that particular area? And sometimes there'll be blossom, but other times you really can't see what you think might be the difference. But sometimes it could be that the soil quality is better in that area, more insects and leaf litter and things like that are being produced, and it's creating a better food web for our woodland birds in that area. And as I was saying there, the leaves are actually, because they've got all those trace elements and minerals in them that it gets from its host, they're really sought after from beetles, spiders, moths, butterflies, and also from gliders and possums and things like that. There's even anecdotal evidence that koalas like to eat mistletoe. So they will be topping up their reserves of those minerals by eating the mistletoe leaves. They might not eat them all the time, but it's just something that they could use to top up their resources. And 23 butterfly species actually depend on mistletoe as principal food plants. So they're really important for insectivores too. And if you didn't spot it, hidden in that little clump of mistletoe is a tiny an olive-backed oriole. So if anyone's familiar with that species, but lots of our native species, 245, have been so far recorded nesting in mistletoe clumps, and lots of them eat the blossom and the fruit. So yeah, they're pretty amazing plants, I think. As I said, they also have a lot of water in them too. So they've got the nutrients, but they have the water. And often that can actually make branches fall. So it does assist with development of hollows. So that's another sort of benefit there. We know that a lot of our trees take a long time to form hollows. So it can sometimes assist by creating such a heavy weight, the branch falls off and then it'll open it up for insects and birds and everything to get in there. And the other thing that's an area of research too is that as we've got a warming climate, it's changing, our livestock as well as our native animals need a lot more shade and areas of refuge on those really hot days that I know a lot of the speakers have talked about that we're going to have a lot more of. So having dense clumps of mistletoe can actually provide more shade for your livestock and animals, and it's been found too that marsupials like red kangaroos preferentially will go and rest throughout the day in shrubs that have mistletoe because they have a denser canopy, provide a cooler area for them to rest. Now these are the merry men. These are the little critters, beautiful birds that are out there spreading the mistletoe love everywhere. So you've got your mistletoe bird up the top, painted honeyeaters, another interesting one down the bottom. So they're another threatened bird that's actually threatened at a Commonwealth level as well. And they occur more west of the Divide and generally more associated with box gum and acacia woodlands, and they actually eat the fruit. So those two species eat the fruit and will spread it around the landscape. And then you've got some other honeyeaters, possums and gliders, and some other opportunistic species that will sort of eat it, or it might get even attached to this. It's very sticky, so it might get attached to the fur, and then a possum might visit another tree and it might just happen to get wiped off. So we think that that's actually how mistletoe gets spread further afield, whereas the mistletoe bird will just kind of concentrate in an area, whereas if it gets wiped on a fur of a possum, say, and it travels a lot further, it might be the way that mistletoe gets to a new area when you've got sort of gaps in the landscape and things like that. So they spread it around for us. So little mistletoe bird man. So they are way more efficient than we are at being able to plant mistletoe. As you saw in that video, they could eat their body weight in that mistletoe fruit and then be pooping it all out within 12 to 60 minutes of it being swallowed. And the amazing thing with mistletoe is that nearly all the seeds will actually germinate. It's about something like 90% will germinate, but it's very rare that they actually establish a new plant. So 90% won't germinate, but I think something like 10% will actually survive to be a mature plant. So it's a real numbers game with trying to get mistletoe to establish. And then, as I said, they could be predated, they could be, they could be shed with bark before they've even had a chance to establish. So, yes. I just want to go back to that. How do I get? Oh, yeah, here we go. There we go. So this is a fun fact. You can 66,000 seeds per hectare per season. I just wish that I had a cage full of mistletoe birds that I could let out into the landscape and make them stay in my project area and do it for me, but you can't do that. Couldn't get ethics approval, I don't think, for that. So just wanted to talk about how important your area is, Northwest and Northern Tablelands woodlands. Obviously, like this area with your box and your gum woodlands, there's some ironbark patches, but generally that lower lying fertile country was where these species did best. So Regent Honeyeater, critically endangered bird, we've only got about 250 that we think are left in the wild in a massive distribution from southeast Queensland all the way down to Victoria. They once occurred into South Australia and much further up into Queensland. Their range has contracted a lot because of habitat loss. Two other little species there that are insectivores, hooded robin and brown tree creeper. And as I've sort of said, mistletoe links all these species, no matter whether they eat the fruit or the flowers. The other birds benefit because the mistletoe provides that nutrient-rich leaf litter that falls to the forest floor, the woodland floor, and actually means that there are better insect populations that occur in these areas, and so that attracts these other species. So unfortunately, we've got this long, long list of threatened woodland birds that do occur here, like our swift parrot, and some of these other beautiful species like the turquoise parrot, the scarlet robin, and a whole range of honeyeaters. So a lot of our ground-based insectivores are some of the most threatened species that we have across the range, and the most numerous, and that's obviously because the degraded landscapes that don't have like really good quality soils and leaf litter anymore, which they would normally be down on the ground foraging in. And as I said, mistletoes play a big part in the story. A lot of you would probably be familiar, and this may be the one that you have in all your trees, the box mistletoe. It generally looks like that big sort of teardrop shape or hanging clump that'll be in the trees and often turns a bronzy kind of colour. But that's just one of 97 species that we have across Australia. It's just that it tends to be the one that people see the most of. It does stick out, but it's actually a really popular nest site for a lot of birds. Okay, so I just want to show this. When we survey Regent Honeyeaters, we have this National Regent Honeyeater Monitoring Program. We have all of these locations all up and down the range. It's about 2,000 sites that we currently go and survey. This is your sort of area here. So I think I've got Gulf Creek and some sites near Bundara, Guida, TSR, I think it is down there, Yarrawick. So in that area there, we come out and we search. But in spring 2020, we had such a poor year for eucalypt blossom coming off the back of the drought. And basically what we were finding was that there just wasn't gum trees available. So we weren't finding Regent Honeyeaters. But we found lots of mistletoe flowering. And so whenever there was lots of mistletoe, we got a really diverse range of woodland bird species. Even, little baby noisy firebirds that have still got their baby fluffy feathers were into the mistletoe. So it was really getting birds through a bottleneck in, foraging resources not being available that they would usually use. And when we did finally find some Regent Honeyeaters, they were in needle-leaf mistletoe, and the adults were sustaining themselves on the needle-leaf mistletoe blossoms. So they're in river she oaks, and then that's the mistletoe species that is quite cryptic. It has the same sort of mimics the host tree's leaves. So when it's not in flower, really hard to see in the trees, but the Regent Honeyeaters know how to find it, and especially when it's got that beautiful red blossom. It's got great nectar for them. And as I said, I won't go through that, I'll just quickly summarise. There was a removal experiment that was done by Charles Sturt University that actually took away all the mistletoe, and then they saw what happened if you took mistletoe away from a woodland completely. And when you did that, the woodlands lost more than a third of their resident woodland bird species. So, and what was really amazing was it wasn't so much the nectivores that were affected, it was the ground foraging insectivores. So they took away that leaf litter tap that was producing all those amazing nutrients into the soil and encouraging all the spiders and the beetles and all the things that those birds like to eat. And they knew that because they had control sites, and they also had some sites where mistletoe was naturally absent. So it was the first time that was ever done, and it was a really sort of pivotal moment, I guess, in mistletoe research to show that it really is a keystone ecological species in these ecosystems. Yeah. So another disturbing thing that we've now found out by doing all of the monitoring, so at the sites where we monitor for Regent Honeyeaters, we also monitor for mistletoe, and we look at live and dead and how it's doing. And so basically there was a journal article that was put out by some of my colleagues and by people from ANU and Charles Sturt, and they found that the mistletoe decline is actually threatening nectar feeding birds like the Regent Honeyeater. But really through the height of the drought, when it was really dry, but when we had the warm nighttime temperatures, that was knocking off the mistletoe and often the host trees as well. So I think we would know throughout this region, we've had a lot of rural tree decline. So that unfortunately has led to a lot of our mistletoes dying off too, because once the host is really suffering, they end up dying off too. So we need to look at how we can use mistletoes to plant it and bring it back to these areas and help our woodland birds, but at the same time realise that we're working in ecosystems that have had a really hard time as well. So we sort of have to consider where we plant, because they could be, still undergoing some stress. So I'll quickly tell you about this amazing project that we've just worked on with Northwest Local Land Services. So I believe people would know Wally Hammond, and he wasn't available to be here today, but he helped my colleague Sarah, and then that was on our arborist, obviously in the hard hat, and Craig Pullman from LLS was in on this as well. And so basically we were looking at doing habitat augmentation for the Regent Honeyeater, which still occasionally turns up around Mindaribba and a couple of other areas around the place. It used to be one of its stronghold regions. So we thought we need to get a bit of mistletoe back into this ecosystem. So this is one of the first inoculation trials for needle-leaf mistletoe. So my other project that I work on, we do long-flowered mistletoe, which is more of a coastal species. And we're down the track of that, where we've been doing that for 3 years, and we're starting to get plants germinating to become mature. But we want to try it on another species now, because it's a widespread species found up and down the range of Regent Honeyeaters. So unfortunately we couldn't get a lot of fruit this year. Sometimes it's a bit fickle, it's hard to find fruit across the range. So I'm really interested if people would want to email Woodland Birds at BirdLife. I'll put it on the last slide. And if you notice needle-leaf mistletoe or other species fruiting and flowering in your area, I would love to know, because we would like to have more like a phenology type database of when these species produce fruit and flower, so that we can direct people to places that they may want to collect some fruit and try to plant the fruit themselves. So this is just basically summarising. We did the work at Dry Oaky Creek. Most mistletoes at that location had died off during the last drought, and we got the fruit from Ironbark Creek. It still had healthy plants, so we could get a bit of fruit from there, and we ended up getting 187 fruit within a 7-hectare patch, which was carragerinas along a creek line at Dry Oaky Creek. And we will come back in 9 to 12 months and see what the success of them is. I just want to show you this photo here. It could be a little bit hard to see, but this is the kind of tall trees the arborists are up in. And the marks are just showing where they've actually planted the seed. So we take a photo, waypoint the tree, and then also just mark on the photo where we put the seed. So when the arborists go back, it's obviously very important that we match up the right tree, and then we can basically have a monitoring program going where we'll work out the germination success of the project. Unfortunately, we can't just jump up in the tree like the mistletoe birds. We've got to get these arborists up there. I think the thing, the thing that is important with mistletoe is, I'm just going to show you quickly this. So say here you've got your piece of fruit, you've got to pick the fruit, and when you actually squeeze it out, like in the video, it's got that viscin, that real sticky sort of substance, and that actually keeps the seed wet until it establishes and puts its root down into the branch. So if you didn't have that, it wouldn't likely stick to the branch and actually stay. So we'd have to work out a way that you still retain that. Yeah, exactly. So we're definitely looking for different ideas. There's somebody down in Melbourne who's developed sort of this long stick type thing that he can just reach up rather than needing an arborist, and it actually wipes individual seeds out. But that depends on the species. We're learning lots of things about all these different species and how to do it. There you go, that just shows you. So that's just someone just wiping it. So all you need to do, if you find some fruit, and you don't want to climb up, find a branch that's only about the size of your finger, maybe your little finger through to your thumb size, and you just want to wipe it on the underside or the side of a branch like the mistletoe bird would do. So we're doing that as well. So I would definitely say probably north round to south. Don't avoid hot westerly side of the tree, and try to get it in the outer canopy of a tree. Plant it further along a branch, just gets more sunlight. So I'm going to be doing some more monitoring soon, and then that'll actually probably reveal what sort of success rate we're getting. So just to summarise the importance of these projects, so basically mistletoe in our landscapes is seeing our woodland birds through a bottleneck, especially in the past 5 breeding seasons. We've seen Regent Honeyeaters feeding or sustaining themselves on the nectar to be able to rear their young. There's no other blossom in the landscape, and they have to have got really high energy needs through that breeding period, so they're sustaining themselves on mistletoe. And we hope that by doing that, it's an important step in making sure that Regent Honeyeaters return to this area. And it will also help a whole range of other woodland birds. So had lots of other things I could have shown you today, but obviously, yeah, 1 more minute, okay, see what I can get through. All right, this is just another project I've worked on. So we talked about drought, but then we also need to talk about fires. So fires are becoming more intense and frequent in places in the Hunter Valley. Some like these were completely torched. We had, canopy, lost canopy, so just terrible. The mistletoe completely removed. Almost 90% of mistletoe killed. Some patches there was complete removal. But in this area there was the long-flowered mistletoe, and it was a vital breeding and wintering site for Regent Honeyeaters where I work down near Curry and Cessnock, and this now the place to see a Regent Honeyeater. If you were trying to see one, you need to come down to the Tomalpin Woodlands, which is on Mindaribba land, Wonnarua Country, and yeah, we've had birds there for about a year. They've just left. They've just left. I don't know where they've gone, and we wish that we could find that out. We are doing some radio tracking of birds, but they've gone beyond the scope of our radio trackers. So yeah, just sort of basically showing that some of these mistletoe occur all up and down the range of the Regent Honeyeater. That's why they're such an important foraging source. Yeah. Yep, that's all at a time. Yep.